There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. A dimension of sound.
For the 150th time, you are not getting out of here. Please let me finish the Count of Monte Cristo.
A dimension of sight.
No change at all.
What? I think I look fine.
A dimension of mind. Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Fifth Dimension, a Twilight Zone podcast. I am as your host, as always, Nick, 9 of season 1 of the Twilight Zone. We're back after recording from a couple weeks. You know, we took a week off because I had some reviews to do, and you know, our avatar was probably sitting in the cold somewhere. He just kind of wondering about that cup of whatever she has in her, you know, avatar picture there. But once again, I'm joined by Triv of Trivial Theater. Triv, how you doing? How has your last couple of weeks been since we recorded? All that good stuff.
Not doing too bad. Could always use a little bit of liqueur to lace my coffee, but you know, I'm not doing okay.
Well, I mean, if you like this guy in this episode, if you start dreaming about it, maybe it'll come true.
I don't want to die in my dreams due to a romantic heart.
I don't know if you die, but I mean, maybe you can imagine yourself having a Scrooge-like vault of beer and alcohol and whiskey and.
But I can't dive into that. What's the point if I can't dive through the bottles of stuff the way that Scrooge McDuck does? I mean,
if he can dive through very hard pieces of coin that a lot, obviously that would kill him. I think he would be fine diving through shattered glass and bottles and stuff.
I'm just gonna say ouch and no, and we should probably get on talking about this episode because you have a weird fetish with diving into sharp objects that I'm kind of worried about.
I am. I call my brain sharp object because it's very, very fragile. But anyways, so yes, we are here once again to talk Twilight Zone, the 1959 to 1964 whatever series that was on for 5 or 6 years.
What we're talking about? Holy crap, I didn't know that. I thought we were talking about the Twilight movie franchise.
No, we did that yesterday when we watched Night Teeth and Sparkle and all that good stuff. So
hey, there were no sparkly vampires. Let's be frank. I mean, unless they were blowing up, they were a little sparkly, but not quite the same thing.
Exactly. So before we begin, we are a Twilight Zone podcast. We talk about the Twilight Zone. We have been doing this for quite a while. As I always say, we have the video form that shows up on YouTube. We now have the audio form as well that shows up on Apple Podcasts and Google Play, all that good stuff. If you go to any of those and you like our content, please rate, subscribe, give us stars and stuff like that so we can be found by the community that is the entertainment community and fandom and stuff like that, because we want to make money off this one day, hopefully, maybe in the future.
That would be cool. Well, if you look behind me, we actually have quite a few stars as it sits inside the Twilight Zone logo. That's got to count for something, right?
I know. I wish every one of those stars was a dollar. We'd be never having to work again,
Yay!
So here we are talking the week after Time Enough at Last, and as we recognize the episode is pretty amazing. It has some issues as we brought it up, but this week we're talking about an episode called Perchance to Dream, which is once again season 1, episode 9 of the Twilight Zone. It's directed by Robert Florey and actually not written by Rod Serlings this time. It's actually written by Charles Beaumont, who the story is a short story based off a Charles Beaumont story. And it's really interesting because I always thought that Rod Serlings wrote almost every script of the season, or he wrote every script of the season. At some point, he started handing it off to other writers. But as we've talked about, and I know Triv, you know this as well, he is an individual who is very well known to be friends with Charles Beaumont, and they developed a relationship. And, like a lot of his writers, he brought him on because they had interesting stories to tell. So with that said, do you remember, I guess we should start out, do you remember this episode at all before watching it?
Oh yeah, I've actually seen this one a couple times, and it is one that I remember enjoying, but having watched it again, even with a critical eye to it, I did still by and large enjoy it.
Yeah, no, it's an episode that I actually don't remember at all, which is really weird because I have seen this episode before, I'm pretty sure, because I've seen every episode of the Twilight Zone. But as we're going to talk about, you like this episode. I am entirely not on board with this episode at all. I know, I'm sure you know, this was speculated to be a inspiration for Wes Craven for Nightmare on Elm Street, as well as the novella, which was written by Charles Beaumont, which, as we can see in the episode, it has a lot of the same kind of motifs and a lot of the same logical reasonings that Wes Craven put in his movie. You know, the people who refuse to sleep, and when they go to sleep, they deal with, you know, a creature or demon or an entity, I guess you could say, and that's what's going to happen in this episode. But yeah, it's like, you know, reading that kind of stuff. Did you see also that kind of that relations and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, and I think you could judge the whole like being scared to sleep thing from a lot of different levels, but it definitely, like the kind of carnivalist or carnival atmosphere definitely plays into that, what we get from Wes Craven down the way too. So
with that said, it's the production code for this episode is 173-336-16, which means it was actually filmed 2 episodes after Time Enough at Last. The composer is not actually Bernard Herrmann this time. It's actually Nathan Von Cleve, which you can... It's a really strange thing to talk about composers, but music really has a very interesting impact on films and TV. And you can actually kind of tell that this isn't a Bernard Herrmann score. And even with Time Enough at Last, same thing. Is there's a definitely, if you like listening to like John Williams or Hans Zimmer, there's definitely a look and feel to the composer that is missing here, which actually kind of put me off a little bit just on the way it kind of moves through the episode and stuff like that. So another thing, really interesting kind of trivia note about this is I read through Wikipedia, and I have no idea what I did with the book, or I'm sure there's trivia in there. I feel like an idiot for not knowing.
You
this
bastard.
episode, I know this episode is also inspired by Hamlet's "To Be or Not to Be," and I guess that episode or that speech is about suicide, contemplates death and suicide, bemoaning
Basically,
the pain. Yeah. Which
to
I thought was
sleep,
really fascinating.
Perchance to dream.
Okay. So the actual title, I see. I have never read this To Be or Not to Be, which from Hamlet. So I don't think I've ever read Hamlet. So that's where Perchance to Dream came from, huh?
Yeah, it was like to be or not to be. Is it greater to? I'm gonna screw it up. But it's later on. He says to sleep, perchance to dream as part of that. So.
See, you learn something new every day.
Yeah, there you go.
Learn something new every day. And the only time I remember Hamlet is when Billy Madison was doing Hamlet, and it was some
it
good
is
stuff,
one of its underrated performances of Hamlet. Because there are some shitty ones.
Exactly.
Didn't Mel Gibson play Hamlet?
Yeah, I think he did one that was directed by Kenneth Branagh, if I remember right.
I think so.
Or he direct. Let me check. I think it was in. Check.
It features a very clear, and it's said that Hamlet has an affair with his mom, but they outrightly, I think, show the affair with his mom.
Bow chicka wow wow.
Pretty much, yeah. Got a little incest. Incest forever, baby.
No, this is directed by Franco Zeffirelli. I think is what his name is. So.
There you go.
That explains a random guy that I've never heard of before. So
Franco Zeffirelli, wasn't that? No, I'm thinking Frank Zappa. Never mind.
No, I'm pretty sure this guy wasn't a pot smoking. No, yes, she is. I've watched that documentary, and I know that guy was a clean individual. So he, this is going straight off the rails. I'm sorry, people. So let's go back to Perchance of Dream. So, anyways, it's inspired by Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. It's based off a Charles Beaumont story, and it's the first one not written by Rod Serlings. And so this story is really interesting because it's actually probably one of the most simple stories I've ever seen in a Twilight Zone. It's very straightforward. It does stuff really simply, but it has an interesting kind of overlining theme about certain events, and we'll talk about that. But going into this movie, or going to this episode, as I always ask, as from a critical eye, knowing that you've seen it before and remembering it, did you find yourself possibly enjoying this episode, or did you think you might, like Time Enough at Last, maybe go in this with a little more negativity? Did you still go in knowing that you'd enjoy it, or?
I think the Time Enough at Last has such hype around it, and I do think you
Mhm.
get caught up in that hype, and Perchance to Dream doesn't necessarily have that as much. It is more of an even keeled story. And I know for me personally, like I felt not that you can relate to dreaming of death or being scared to sleep for fear of death on a normal basis, but I do think that that's something that everyone can relate to. And knowing
Exactly.
it was done by Charles Beaumont
Mhm.
and the way he writes science fiction and supernatural stories, I think you can look at this and say this is, it comes from a place of realism in our own psyches, but then it's taken and elevated.
That's what's so fascinating about this episode. Like, so we'll talk about it, is just the idea and concept of how we are so terrified of life and we're always constantly running away from the things that we can't help. And, this individual is having such terrifying dreams and stuff like that. But getting into the opening narration, it's pretty simple. We see Edward Hall on the street. He looks like I'm not sure. I guess this might come off funny, but he looks like he's like an addict, like he's a drug addict, because he's like shaking and he's like staring wide eyed at the people on the street. He walks up to the building and like somebody approaches him and he's like, "Are you all right, buddy?" And that's when the opening narration pops up. And Rod Serlings says, 12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene, an ordinary city. Lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, the hour will be a rest, a pleasant break in day's routine. To most, but not all. To Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death. So that's a pretty standard setup, pretty good setup. We're getting a lot of information about this individual just through those couple sentences about this guy is afraid of time, afraid of whatever he's afraid of, life and death. But just going off that sentence, let's say you've never watched this episode before, would you understand what you're getting yourself into, not knowing that there's dream logic and there's this woman named Maya and this doctor and stuff like that? Do you think this would have made sense for you, or do you feel it's confusing? How do you feel about like the opening narration?
I knew exactly what was going to happen, except for I thought the lady's name was going to be Sylvia and not Maya.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. No, I really didn't. What they start you with, like, I guess it does kind of precurse what's going to happen. You see kind of, because it starts with the big tall shot of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose if you look at it from that perspective, he's looking up and then later on, he looks down in a rather, extreme way.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
From that perspective, I suppose you could see it that way. But no, if I would have come into this not knowing where it was going to lead, I would have thought it was, like you said, dealing with a drug addict or something other than, obviously he's paranoid about something, but we have no idea what.
And that's what's interesting, is this episode is, to me, one of the most Twilight Zone-y type episodes, because the episodes that deal with like paranoia and the unknown or stuff that I think Rod Serling was really I mean, this is written by Charles Beaumont, but Charles Beaumont and Rod Serling and all the writers he has were very adept at doing, which is just the unknown nature of the human existence and condition. I mean, nobody knows until it happens, and maybe they don't even know, depending on your belief, what happens after you die. And this is just a story about a guy who's afraid of something that is in his dream, that because it's the Twilight Zone, it's affecting who he is and stuff like that. But we talk, actually you and I talk a lot about, I'll wake up and I'll tell you about a dream I had, and it's pretty crazy how effective dreams can be on a subconscious level in your day-to-day life, and it shows. So I don't know if you have anything to say on that, but it's really
no, I agree. I think that like the falling dream, like, why do we dream about the things that we dream about? It does, it does bring to light, where did these come from? And there's so much, there's a lot known about it, a lot more than they knew about in 1959, but there's still so much we don't know.
And this episode, I mean, is not going into like the true unknown. This is an episode about a guy who is having these weird dream-like visions and stuff like that. But it still deals with, I put it in, it still deals with, running away from fears, our commitments, us being a human in its nutshell. And, he's running away from the things he can't change and the fears that of just human existence and stuff like that. So, but with that said, like I said, Edward Hall, who's played by, of course, Richard Conte, Dr. Elliot Rathman is played by John Larch, and Maya, Miss Thomas, is played by Susan Lloyd. And so Edward Hall walks in or runs into the building. We are introduced to Dr. Elliot Rathman, who is pretty much the second principal and only principal character outside of Edward Hall.
Yep.
But he walks in there, and you have no idea why he's there. You know that he goes in there, and even the doctor is kind of not really knowing why he's there. He was just kind of referenced by Edward's other doctor. But once again, you're at a point in this episode where this guy is ranting and raving. Do you think that this concept of this character and how his overall portrayal got you on board for this episode? Were you really worried that he was going to do something stupid at this point? How did you I know I'm kind of leading you on with these questions, but where did you see that, from the opening narration to the point he walks in the office, did you still feel like it was a drug issue? How'd you feel about that, I guess?
When he went into it's been quite a while since I've seen this one. So when he went into the doctor's office, obviously, it said Dr. Rathman on the door, so you knew it was going into a doctor's office. But I, for some reason, still thought it was a normal doctor, not a psychologist.
Right.
So, when they move back and you see the couch there and all that stuff, it's oh, okay, right. He's a therapist kind of doctor, not a doctor, not a, turned your head to the left and cough type of doctor. So from that, when he starts going in and talking about all the stuff that's going on, you get the idea, okay, this is what he's here for, da 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 da. So yeah, you could still be drug oriented at that state. If you came in, and I mean, he was on drugs, but it was for his heart, not for, something to keep him awake or an antipsychotic or whatever.
Right. And I don't know if this is 100% true, but I was looking up the ancestry of Rathman, and it's a German occupational name for counselor or arbiter, but it is also in Hesse, also is executioner, which I think is kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it generally fits. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. But the thing, before we get into what exactly is going on, there is a shot where Rathman tells Hall to lay down, and Hall falls asleep, and it leads into a major situational plot point at the very end of the episode. But he wakes back up and so on and so forth. But there is a really cool shot before he lays down that I haven't seen the Twilight Zone do yet, which is a crane shot from the office to the couch. So it actually pulls up and moves towards Edward Hall and moves down, kind of like you're looking from the heavens or something like that, or you're almost like an angel. You're pulling up and moving with Edward Hall's character and moving down, like you're getting ready to, as we'll learn what happens at the end of this episode. I'm not saying that's what it is, but it was a really fascinating kind of shot, which maybe they used as just kind of a technique type of move, but I was almost feeling like that was maybe an angel or something like that, because he's always having these issues about his dreams and stuff like that, and maybe how it plays out. But I don't know. That was just a really cool shot. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. I always look into things sometimes too deeply. So
no, not at all. There was a couple of those kind of things, like the way that they use light and shadow in this episode was incredibly cool across the board. And then there's also the music, or the kind of sound effects and music that go on, like when he goes to sleep, is something like, it does kind of give you that kind of disjointed kind of musical stinger.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And well, I was gonna say the shadowing light you're talking about over the eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That's a really interesting 50s and 60s technique that I always enjoy, because you always see it, it's used even in Wizard of Oz in the 30s, and I think it's to show the emotion in the eyes, and it kind of brings it out to make it, because it's all black and white, it gives it more of a pop. But it has an interesting feel to it, because especially in this episode, because it's how deep and dark and disturbing it gets. the idea of just focusing on the eyes, which give the most emotion. Like if you ever watch a movie where characters in a lot of makeup, you can always tell who the character is just by their eyes and how emotionally resonant it is. And I thought that was fascinating. But yeah, it's a very cool technique that they do in this episode as well. And I'm sure they do it in other episodes, but
oh yeah. There is one other cool shot in there too.
Yeah.
You're talking about just the kind of interesting shots. There's a
Mhm.
close-up shot. He talks about this boat on the wall that he relates back to a story that he had when he was a kid.
Yeah.
About how he stared at this picture on the wall and made it move because his imagination was incredibly good. But it goes from this close-up shot of the boat over to his face, and just it's a really quick, like a whip zoom, or no, what is it? A whip. I'm trying to think of the proper term. Basically,
Yeah, it was just called whip zoom.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah.
But it goes to his face, and that's when you get some of those light effects on his face.
Mhm.
And it's just like it hits you.
Right. It's amazing how effective, like the simplest things, like music, like a small musical cue or a lighting effect, and that's what, like, Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles and so on and so forth, most famous for is doing those kind of like shots that are so technically advanced but so simple and so like potent in a lot of respects. And it's interesting to see how that works. And like I said, if you've ever stared at a picture, and I'm not talking about one of those you like your eyes like squint and it's like blur in, you can see like a picture in that like weird thing, like in like
Magic eye.
Mallrats. Yeah, magic eye, like in Mallrats and stuff like that.
I just want to see the sailboat.
Like how he turns to the kid, F you. But yeah, if you've ever stared at a picture long enough, I mean, he tells the truth. You almost can see like it almost moves and stuff like that. And whether he's like actually seeing it move, it has an interesting kind of effect on his kind of psychology and his psychoanalysis or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
psyche. Thank you. I'm going like doctor's terms now or
that's
some
okay.
nonsense. But as we move into the episode is essentially about a man who is having issues with dreams. And what's really interesting is, like we talked about earlier in the this episode, is the way this episode plays out is very similar to Nightmare on Elm Street in its own respect, because I'm saying Nightmare on Elm Street. Anyways, you know what I mean. What it's doing is it's giving us a story about a guy who's being tormented by something in his dreams, and it's causing him to lose his sanity. But what's interesting is he talks to his doctor. He gives the story to his doctor about this time he was like in his car or something like that, and he kept imagining that somebody was in the backseat. The funny thing about I actually got to ask you this. I couldn't remember this scene where he's talking to the doctor about the car. Was this a dream or was this something that happened to him in the past? Because he talks about when he's like 15 years old and when he was a kid. But do you remember if this was actually a dream or something that happened to him?
This actually happened to him. So he was driving, he drove to and from through this darkened area, and he heard a story about someone seeing like a lady that was killed, and she's, the guy hid in her backseat, and he relates back to that. And then he goes on to talk about how after that, he was always looking in his rearview mirror and his imagination would get away from him. And he never saw anything until the one time he saw a face, he flipped his car, had an accident, almost died because he, in addition to the dream thing, he has a rheumatic heart.
Yeah, it's a heart, like a bad heart condition,
Yeah, which is, I looked it up, it's a condition where the heart valves are permanently damaged from rheumatic fever. The heart valve may damage shortly after being untreated or undertreated streptococcal infections such as strep throat or scarlet fever.
It's really, actually, talking about that for a second, it's really interesting to see how far we've come in medicine, just even the last 60, 70 years. This is the kind of stuff that what he's dealing with is something that probably could have been curable today.
Yeah, well, if untreated, but yeah, ideally speaking, you would get it treated.
Yeah, but it's just I'm wondering if like what he has is something that wasn't well known in the medical field and how to cure it back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, I think because if he was 35 and if this was 59, he would have been born in 34.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah. In that time, maybe like they probably had stuff, but it might not have been widespread to be able to help people. So like it might have been out there, but not for the general public as much.
Right. It's yeah, it's interesting to think about because you hear always all these times about people who have like strep throat or something like that. They end up, I'm not saying that's what it is, but they end up dying from it, and just how today, our cures and stuff like that could, saved a lot of people back in those days. But
oh yeah, very much so.
So getting back on kind of topic of this episode, so he has the heart issue. He crashes his car because he sees I'm assuming he sees Maya's character, the
Yep, in the rear view. Maya.
Yeah, Maya, Suzanne.
He doesn't
Lloyd.
know. He only sees her eyes, though. He doesn't see the rest of her.
Which I'm going to talk. Remind me, but I'm going to talk about something that I thought was kind of interesting about that possibility. Yeah. And so he starts conveying. Actually, he opens the window as well. Looks out the window. Which once again, we talked about this on Time Enough at Last. I'm starting to see a thing where this group of individuals, this writer staff and directors, are willing to go to some really dark places, even in 1959, I think it was. We're still in 1959 to tell a story. So this guy is looking out the window, like the doctor even is like contemplating this guy contemplating suicide because he shuts the window. Mm-hmm. And I really find that fascinating. I was really put off by it, but I'm starting to wonder if like these episodes are just like cautionary tales also about mental illnesses as well, which I thought was kind of fascinating. If they read stories about people having dream issues or stuff like that. I mean, I know this is based off a book from Charles Beaumont, but did he read stuff about people having dream problems and stuff like that? And I just really think it's interesting, these social commentary issues that are put into these types of, episodes, even for 1959, because this is stuff even today that can be a little, what's that word
risque?
Called? Not risque, but let's say you put like a sex scene in something like taboo. Thank you. Can be very taboo even today. People don't really want to, they're a little more adhered to it, but they, still very taboo in its nature. But he starts talking to the doctor. I think this was either after or before the end of the act. But he starts talking to the doctor about this dream he's been having that caused him to stay awake for 87 hours. And before we get into that, because I'm sorry if I'm going all over the place, but before we get into that, we'll say the act ends there. Seeing the little bit that we know about his dream with the car and him walking into the room and him looking out the window, possibly committing suicide. What was your overall take on that first act? Did you enjoy it? Did you find problems with it? Like, where were you sitting after that first act?
I think the buildup for it was pretty good. You knew something was coming, but you didn't quite know what. And another thing that was kind of that'll come back later that I got thinking about at this point, when you saw the eyes in the rear view, like when he walks into the waiting room of the doctor, you only see the back of the secretary's head.
Yeah, and that's going to play out later on the episode. Yeah,
exactly. I think that he did. I think that it builds tension pretty well, because at the very last thing they do, they kind of cliffhang you, like before it kind of breaks. He says, "I'll dream and I won't wake up. This dream will basically kill me." I'm paraphrasing, but I think they do a really solid job of that. If anything, I think that the psychologist, because there is some humor that the psychologist plays with as they're going back and forth. And I think that that's kind of interesting. And then, guy goes to look out the window and starts to lean out, and the psychologist is like, "Okay, I need to take a step back."
Yeah. Cause, I know psychologists use things and patterns and concepts to kind of get into the working mind of how an individual, perceives things. So I don't necessarily think I was on board with Dr. Rathman. I think he was a little too simplified for a doctor. I mean, yes, the window thing is, prevalent and stuff like that, but maybe it's the fact that he, in a Twilight Zone episode, maybe had to make it a little more simplified. But I thought Edward Hall's character was interesting, a little too over the top in his nature, the way he talks and the way he acts. Knowing from, because he's under a lot of stress, he hasn't slept, knowing from 4 days of not sleeping. I don't know how many days you've gone without sleeping. I know long. I don't. Not 4 hours. I'll tell you what, you see things, it's crazy. It's not something I'd ever recommend, but I've done it. But I don't act like this. I don't, I still had crazy dreams when I actually slept. But I don't know. I just think the idea of this character and what he's doing is a little too over the top and silly for an individual. I think, the idea of his dreams and stuff like that has been done better since, but I just didn't buy this Dr. Rathman at all in the first part, and I think he's even I think until the very end sequence, I don't think he really adds too much outside of just being the audience surrogate as a listener to his story.
Mhm.
And maybe giving a little bit of advice, and we'll talk about that. But I mean, do you agree with that? Do you find fault in that statement? I mean, what are you overall?
I
What's
think
your
that
feeling?
I think that you make a good point. I mean, he definitely
Mhm.
doesn't. He plays. He. It's like the old saying about "I play a doctor on TV." I mean, it is more that perspective than
Right?
anything else. But I
Yeah.
do think, like, I think the idea that he kind of, because you got to have someone to bounce those stuff off of, and I think that, as you say, he does act as audience surrogate.
Hmm.
And when he first comes in, the psychologists at the time were portrayed as, a little bit more simple, I guess. They weren't going to go in depth. Okay, I'm going to, subscribe, or good Lord, I'm going to prescribe you, this and that and the other thing, or, oh, well, this is clearly the sign of a deranged mind, or, whatever it's going to
Right.
be. It is sort of played, like when he comes in, he has sort of played just a tiny bit for humor, trying to lighten the mood with the guy, and kind of say, okay, let's talk you down from this place. Let's, he's trying to break the tension, I think, more than anything else. But he definitely
Right.
serves as an audience surrogate. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just weird to me personally. It's weird from knowing what it's like to not sleep for so many days to see a character kind of put it like almost like a comedy act in a lot of respects. That's just my personal opinion. It was
Understood.
an episode where there was, and I don't want to fault Charles Beaumont because I was looking at some of the first movies he ever worked. He worked on something called Queen of the Space, or something like Outer Space, or something like
Oh yeah.
that.
I didn't know that movie.
Oh, you do? Okay. I'm assuming it's very campy in its own right.
It tends to
So,
be, at least from what I remember of it. It's been quite a while, but
right. And I know he's a great fictional writer. I know he's very famous for what he does. But sometimes, like a writer, especially J.K. Rowling, for example, translating the writing portion to script portion, it takes a level of finesse. We've
right.
seen this through Stephen King as well. Level
Oh
of
yeah.
finesse they don't
Tons.
have. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't take away from the episode having a lot of interesting messages about fear and commitments, and the causality of how we are scared of what is the unknown. But I just thought the scripting was a little offbeat. And of course, Charles Beaumont, if I read this right, he has written more. Oh, it's actually not the right one. He's written one, two, three, four. Let's just say he's written like 25 episodes
Mhm.
of the
The
Twilight Zone,
Howling
so he
Man is
gets much
amongst
fun.
those too.
Exactly, that is a perfect episode. You talked about was it the Prime Mover or the Painter's Devil?
Printers,
Printer's Devil.
Printers Devil, yeah.
Yeah, he did Living Doll. He did Queen of the Nile. Wasn't that great, but he's Long Distance Call. I think I actually didn't like that
Mhm.
one. As we talk about working, but anyways, he learns to hone his craft and stuff like that. And for a first effort, it's not bad, but I'm not like on
That's
board
okay.
with this. Yeah. So,
That's all right.
anyways, we move. I know, right? I'm going off on
Forgive you
this
this
tangent.
time, but you do it again, and I'm gonna have to, lay the smack down.
You're gonna put out that shirt. Stop tangenting.
Yes. Well, I tangent myself, so if I were to wear that, I would be a hypocrite.
So anyways, we come back from the break and stuff like that, and this is where we get the crux of the episode. We basically learn why he hasn't slept for 87 hours, which is a long time, as we are all aware. I've just said. And what he talks about is he's at a carnival, and it's very much in a kind of way they like move, like the angles and stuff like that. There's really something off about it. And he goes up to shoot the targeting gun game or whatever, and he sees a gentleman introducing a woman who we don't see until he gets close to it, and it's Maya the Cat Lady. And to be safe to say that Maya the Cat Lady is a very odd person, a very odd human character, individual, played very well by the actress. What's her name again? I always forget her
Susan
name.
something, or
Susan Lloyd. Yeah, she's absolutely fantastic as the weird, creepy woman. There's something that Edward Hall's character starts to feel really off about this dream, And he walks away from Maya as she does her dance. He starts to become kind of a little hypnotized by her character. He
Mhm.
walks over and he sits down as he walks away, and she approaches him, and she actually almost like gets him to go with her to this tent, fun house this is called. Pays 50 cents. He walks in, and there's like all these weird creature things and all these weird like devil looking things, like animatronics. I can't remember if it's this one or the second dream he talks about where we see like this monkey looking
That's
character.
the fun house.
Is it?
Yep.
I'll be honest with you. I laughed because it was a really cheesy kind of a really cheesy looking thing. But this first dream that he has, it's really unsettling. It's really uncomfortable. It's really creepy. Do you agree? Like, do you feel that it worked as a kind of unsettling nature about why he's not able to sleep, or is there anything you have to add to talk about that?
I think it definitely could creep you out if you were. The thing is, and it wasn't even so much like, because they did a great job with like the angles and kind of there is an unsettling aspect to that, the way that it's shot, and the way that it moves, and they did a tremendous job with that. But I think bigger for me was the fact that, and I mean, sometimes you can acknowledge that you're in a dream when you're dreaming, but both him and Maya acknowledge the fact that they're in a dream. They both understand it, which normally isn't the case.
Yeah, because if you know anything about dreams, there are certain ideas and theories that there are certain people who can affect their dream. But most of the time, you're just kind of like this camera in your dream, and you're just kind of following along as your story kind of plays out and whatever insane nature your brain is going in. And the fact that he's able to acknowledge that he's in a dream is a really fascinating thing, because it plays into the scary nature of, is this reality? Is this something that is perchancing to death, or perchancing a dream? I mean, it's really kind of a fascinating concept about, it's not really gotten into a lot of depth, but the fact that he knows it's a dream is really telling about his mental state, and about the forces working in his brain. So
very much so.
Yeah,
well, I think too, his like the imagination aspect, the fact that he has a very strong imagination probably plays into being able to have that. I think it's called lucid dreaming, where you're aware that you're in a dream.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very much lucid dreaming. I never can remember the term, but yeah, you're right. It's the ability to affect your dream on a physical level rather than a metaphysical, or however you want to put it. So he tells the other part of the dream. He comes back and we see the doctor and him talking and stuff like that. He goes back and he speaks about more of the dream. He has another dream. This is before he stops sleeping for 87 hours. He's back in the carnival. And if I forget anything, please correct me, because like if I forgot anything between it.
But one thing real quick. Yeah. So after that first dream, his heart was pounding when he woke up. And I think it was like the weird monkey thing that caused him to go off. He woke up. It took him an hour to calm his heart down, and then we go back into the second dream.
Okay. Yeah. See, I knew I didn't write something. There's a couple of things I probably didn't write down, but so he goes back into the second dream, and this time she somehow has control of him, and she's doing the weird laughter and stuff like that, and she forces him onto a roller coaster, which is not good for his heart, especially when he had heart problems after the monkey creature or whatever. But she gets him on there, and I know it's 50s, 60s, but it has some of the worst, like I can't remember what that screening effect is.
I think it's back project, or it's something projection.
Rear projector. Yeah. It's awful. It's like really awful. You can tell it's rear projected. You can tell it's, stock footage and stuff like that. But that's not the point of the thing. The point is
maybe that's what scared him, was the terrible rear projection.
That's what made him kill himself. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, he's being led up to the hill before the downhill or whatever, and she's like, jump off. And that's when he wakes up, but she keeps trying to have him jump off, like she's trying to have him kill himself. And that is a really fascinating thing to see, because it's really scary in its own right. But if somebody is able to affect you that dramatically in your dream to make you, almost die in your dream, that's a pretty either overworked brain, or there's some really interesting entity forces working in his subconscious that are, like what I guess the question is, what about this character Edward Hall, what is making him do this? What is making him see this? Like this is where my kind of main problem is. Like, he's telling these stories about things he's seen in his dreams. I know he has stuff in his childhood, but what exactly is the catalyst for it? What is making him do this? Is he overworked? Is he overstressed? Is he really seeing something that's like an alternate dimension type situation? I mean, I don't know. I was really just kind of maybe a little confused by it. I don't know.
Understood. And I can't say that I have an answer outrightly. I kind of interpreted the Maya the cat thing two different ways. One was the fact that she was trying to push him over the edge to die, or pushing his heart over the edge. The other side, from a modern perspective, was almost, this is a dream. It's almost like a Matrix thing, like jump. This is all, I mean, not to say Matrixy, but kind of Matrixy.
Right.
But I don't think that was definitely not I don't think that was the point of this particular thing. I think it was that subconscious thing, which we don't get much into him other than the fact he's a draftsman, he lives alone, he's got no pre-existing conditions beyond the heart thing. Maybe it was the fact that he couldn't do all that stuff, like, because he couldn't go on roller coasters, he couldn't, he wasn't supposed to do anything that would cause his body stress because of the heart. Maybe there was something inside him that needed that adventure, and it manifested in Maya the cat.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility, because having something like that and having the ability, not to be able to do it, and you're living everyday life, because it's really interesting to see an individual at the beginning of the episode, and you're seeing this rat race situation, and then you're seeing this gentleman on the outside. It's almost like he is maybe saddened by the fact that he can't be part of that, or maybe he feels like an outsider, and it's caused him so much stress in his life that he's now having nightmares or visions, as he claims, or whatever he's having, and it's truly affecting him, or he's woken up like Neo, and he's realizing that there's only a certain amount of time, because he even says, like, here's my dreams, I only have a certain amount of time left. And maybe his conscious just kind of coming to a realization that he is just, I don't know, something different. Maybe, I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, and even with because the show starts on like a rotating door and people coming in and out and in and out, and you could even say that like that kind of represents rat race. And maybe that could either stress him out to the point of, oh my God, look at all this stuff, or it could be like, oh, I can't be part of that because of my heart, like because of physical restrictions. So I think you could play that open as either way, really. Right.
And I don't know if the creatures or the items in the tent, because it says a fun house for one, which is very telling. He wants adventure, he wants fun, he can't have it, and he walks in there and it's all these weird objects and toys and whatever you want to call them, statues, and it's almost like everything that could cause his heart to explode. So he's taking that adventure, but he's not listening to his logic, and he's starting to see things start play out, situational awareness like that when it comes to his personal health and stuff like that. So it was interesting. I don't know if that makes sense, but when he walks into the tent, it's almost like he's trying to be adventurous, but it ends up going sour when he sees that monkey-like creature just kind of walking by and causing the heart arrhythmia or whatever he has. So
I wonder too if Maya was maybe like reckless abandon, like that reckless abandon part of his mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you think about it, she's very outgoing. She's very, wanting to move forward, like move into excitement, into adventure, go on this, go on that. Let's go into the fun house where I'm sure you're going to die. And, but it could be almost like a premonition similar to the episode, which we'll talk about. I can't remember what season it is, but the woman who keeps seeing the airplane explosion, or no, she keeps walking down the hallway, and she ends up saving herself from the airplane explosion at the end of the episode. But it's really interesting. There's a lot of a lot of theories about where this character is going in these dreams and how it is affecting him. And it could be just a premonition of his death, or it could be some underlying force, or like you said, it could be his wanting of something more that he can't have, and it's starting to physically and mentally affect him. And as we see what happens in the end of the episode, but we get to the point where he's at the top of the hill of the roller coaster. She's telling him to jump off, like excitement or something like that, and that's when he wakes up, and he's worried that if he goes back to sleep, he'll get to that point and he'll end up killing himself because he is too much excitement in his heart and stuff like that. And he decides to leave the office at this point to whatever he's going to do. I don't know. He leaves the office even against Dr. Rathman's,
advice.
Advice. Thank you. And he, as this big reveal happens, we see that the receptionist is Maya, who is a different named woman in this, Miss Thomas. She's on a typewriter, blah, blah, blah. And what was interesting about this, and you can also elaborate if you want to as well, is I think when he goes into the room, he saw Maya, or he saw Miss Thomas, and somehow his mind kind of interjected her character into the story, because when we see how this episode ends, it's almost like to me it's almost a foregone conclusion that he saw her walking in, or when she walked in, or when he talked to her, and it became a part of his story.
Going back just a little bit, when he had the car accident, all he saw was her eyes. That's kind of it. So that did leave it open as to how she looked. So yeah, I think his mind could totally fill in the blanks and make Miss Thomas into Maya from that perspective. Because as long as it's a woman or someone wearing very specific kind of eyeshadow and such, or very specific kind of a makeup look.
Right. I mean, it's like the second time this week I talk about Total Recall, but in Total Recall, it's the same type of scenario where he imagines a woman, and then we see that woman in the movie. So it's that type of underlying idea. But what we'll end up doing, I'll kind of finish out the episode, is he sees her, and then he jumps out the window to his death, commits suicide, dies, or at least we think that's what happens.
It scares him. He sees her, and then he gets so scared that he jumps out the window.
Exactly. He's like the guy that goes nope and pulls out the window and jumps out. That type of thing. I love that gif, by the way. So what's really interesting is we shoot after he's jumped out of the window to his death. We shoot back to the doctor, who just seems to be nonchalant in his chair. He walks up, gets Miss Thomas, walks back in the room, and Edward's character is on the chair, the couch, and it's obviously been said that he died, and they check his pulse. Now, there's an episode I think I've talked about on this on our podcast, but there's an episode of Black Mirror called Playtest, which deals with a guy who has been stuck in Japan or Germany or whatever. He goes to be a playtester for this new virtual reality game, or AR, alternate reality game. And throughout the thing, he starts imagining things. And the very end of the episode, he dies, but he's only been under this AR game for like less than a second. So what I really thought was fascinating about this whole idea is, we talked about, and we actually may have talked about this before as well, but the concept of dreams, the concept of how our brain works, how our body works when we're asleep, is similar to like something like they talk about in Inception, where the outside world, the normal world that we're talking in right now, is going at a 60-minute pace, 12 hours, 24 hours a day. But a dream, when you go into the dream, you could have what seems like a 12-hour dream and only sleep for 5 minutes. And it's because your brain is working at such a quick pace to kind of, it's not overloading, but it's kind of the way the brain works is just, it's information just kind of moves quickly when you're asleep and you're resting. I don't necessarily know entirely how it works, but it moves at a quicker pace. Everything works by that faster. And as we see, as you are aware, what happens to Edward is he literally fell asleep for 2 seconds, screamed out, and died, similar to like what happened in Playtest. And that's why I brought up the whole idea of him and Miss Thomas, that he may have looked at Miss Thomas in the the chair typing or whatever, and when he fell asleep he imagined himself having this dream where he's talking to his doctor and so on and so forth, so it caused the whole idea of him finally falling asleep and dying. Because there's also been studies where if you don't sleep long, if you do stay awake too long, you can actually die and stuff like that. And
Oh, yeah.
it was really fascinating. I think it really saved the episode, to be fairly honest, on the simple fact that they actually had some logical reasoning to this guy overslept. He was just stressed out. I mean, there's more to it than that, I'm sure, but he was stressed out. He fell asleep, and it was too much for his heart because he started talking about Miss Thomas or Maya, and all that stuff started affecting him. And when he jumped out the window, that's when he officially died. But the whole episode takes place in like a minute and a half segment.
Basically,
like the whole, yeah. So it still leads into what is our brain doing and stuff like that. Everything we talked about is still very valid. But ending the episode on that note, did that make the episode better for you? What was your overall feeling on it? Like, how did you view like that last portion? I guess is the real question I have.
It was totally Inception. Like that, it felt like I was like, holy shit, this is Inception. that, but it is. I mean, it kind of, and I guess it was all a dream thing is an overused trope, but at that point,
well, yeah,
it wasn't, and it had a payoff. It wasn't just, oh my gosh, everything that happened didn't actually happen. It did happen, and it had consequences.
Yeah, it's like I said, I was really put off by this episode, in the simple fact that I thought it was a little too gaudy, a little too goofy in what it was trying to do. I thought the whole, even though we talked about theories and concepts behind what is happening, I thought the whole carnival stuff was just a little too over the top. Like I said, I laughed with the wolf-like creature, and the devil may have been kind of unsettling, and there was unsettling stuff in it, but
yeah.
It was just so weird, and I just couldn't get into it. And then this ending happens, and I love endings like this because they have such an interesting way to talk about an episode, to get into the nuts and bolts of how does this episode deal with our commitment, our fears, or whatever else we talk about. And it literally is an interesting concept of it only takes place between the time he gets up to the office to the time he lays down is literally like a minute and a half of the actual episode. And I love when they do that kind of stuff. That just makes it for a very kind of, wow, it's just, you told a whole fascinating episode that takes place in this short amount of time that still feels like a really interesting concept. And you delivered on the fact that this guy is having this issue and he didn't survive, and which is really fascinating, which is what he's always afraid of. So, and it actually makes me wonder if even the beginning stuff was ever even real. Was it literally like he went up and because like I said, mind plays tricks on you, but yeah. I don't know. It's really interesting.
Well, and again, you could take it like, and this is going back to the Matrix again, but like when Morpheus is showing Neo the city, it's kind of like fake faceless people. You don't get, there's something that makes them stand out. There wasn't, and obviously it's black and white, so you're gonna have a little bit different scenario there. But you saw people, you saw the same shot of shoes going through the rotating door or the revolving door. You saw, the same kind of people, same kind of haircut, same kind of glasses, same kind of business wear going in and out and in and out. So yeah, I mean, it's quite possible it could have been.
Right. And that's really interesting because like I said before, we're so laser focused on making money. Like we talked about off the air. We were so focused on making money, about having families, having this and that when we have stressful moments and we have worrying moments, it's almost like it takes over us as humans. And, you can see it. Let's say a parent has a kid and they are born, from the time until up to they're born. I mean, even after they're born, you're stressing about, being a father or being a mother. You're stressing about, putting this kid through college, and it eats at you. And we talk all the time about stress and stuff like that. And it's amazing how something like this, with what he's dealing with his heart and stuff like that, or how we deal with stress, is so fascinating on a level that I still don't truly understand. and you watch it, and you watch this episode about a guy who's just dealing with ultimate stress, and it ends up killing him in the end. But it just shows you that it controlled his life. It controlled everything about who he was.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, it's still the Twilight Zone, so there are entities that are kind of moving the story forward. But I don't know. I'm not still a huge fan of this episode. I wouldn't put it like in top 10 or whatever, or top 20. But the ending was such a kind of hits you in the gut that it actually makes it better than a lot of episodes that you'll see that deal with subjects of like dreaming and stuff like that. It makes sense of why Wes Craven would take something like this, because it's a really interesting kind of storytelling aspect, and it's why Nightmare on Elm Street is such a well-beloved classic horror film, is that simple reason of dreams, or everything. It is something that we all do. So
very much so. Well, and you talk about this is going back a little bit, but the idea that Miss Thomas was kind of inserted into his dream in place of whatever entity Maya is supposed to be. And I mean, people do that every day. You have a bad experience with someone, or you have a good experience with someone, their image becomes part of your dream.
Yeah.
That plays in quite a lot.
And the funny thing is, like, even what makes it also really interesting is the carnival isn't the problem that he's having. Is the fact of what the carnival represents, is what his stress is doing to him. It's what his mind is doing to him. The carnival could be his brain trying to cope with the fact that he has so many regrets, so many problems, so many issues with his life growing up, that it really starts to kind of over consume him. And the it's just like, because I've had dreams where I've had 1,000-foot waves and stuff like that, and it has nothing to do with the wave. It has to do with something that's affecting my life. Or if you have money issues, there could be something where you're being chased by a zombie or something. I know it's stupid, but you're being chased by a zombie, and it all has to do with the fact that you have no money in your account or something like that, or you're getting ready to go on a date that you're stressing out about. And I find that kind of concepts very fascinating. Like I said, we're probably going way deeper than even Charles Beaumont maybe have gone,
but it creates discussion, and that's kind of any good Twilight Zone episode will make you say, well, what about this and what about that? I think. And regarding the carnival, I don't know. I would assume that maybe at the time, like, it was meant to be kind of because carnivals, they can be scary, they can be, it's not normal life, and that was probably a really easy way for them to convey, here's this wild and crazy place where anything could happen.
Yeah, true.
That's probably why they went with that imagery.
True. And like I said, just from my limited knowledge, limited reading of dream logic and stuff like that, that's where I kind of ran with it. But yeah, carnivals are very scary, very creepy places when you think about it. I mean, think of, like, when I think of carnivals, I always think of like Big Top Pee-wee, or there was an episode of Goosebumps, a book of Goosebumps called Welcome to Horrorland, and that was scary.
I think it Freaked. The movie Freaked. Oh boy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Randy Quaid. Oh God, help me.
Or the death roller coaster in Nothing But Trouble.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Oh man, speaking of a movie, so. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the underlying what I got out of this episode. Even I actually, as we're talking about it, I started gleaning more and more from the episode, so I thought it was kind of interesting. But to close out the episode, and let me move out of the next episode that I was reading on something about. The closing narration says, "They say a dream takes only a second or so." Very true. Yet in the second, a man can live a lifetime. Very true. You can suffer and die, and who's to say which is the greater reality, one we know or the one in dreams, which was in heaven, the sky, and the earth in the Twilight Zone. So it's basically saying how we perceive things and how we think of things can be depending on how you look at things, I guess. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah. Your dreams are open to interpretation. Just don't jump out of a window in your dream.
Exactly. You might not live through that, which I thought was a very interesting kind of like we said with the Time Enough at Last. It's very interesting how even in '59 they were willing to take these chances. And I mean, most movies you watch in the theater in 1959, or especially horror films, are
It depends
big
where you go.
weird creatures.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it
true.
depends. I mean, it depends. It depends on what kind of movie you're talking about. I mean, I think there was that, but it had to be done in very different ways, because there were a lot of movies that did talk about suicide and things of that nature. I mean, look at old Looney Tunes cartoons, and regarded, yeah, they're cartoons, so a cartoon cat putting a gun to its head isn't going to be the same as having Burgess Meredith put a gun to his head.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, that the stuff was there, and those go back to the 40s, and those were by and large not necessarily originally meant for kids, but they were still watched by a lot of kids.
I know. It's funny too because, like you said, it's very prevalent, but you don't think about that. You always think about the 50s and 40s being very wholesome, and they really weren't. They really
They were
weren't. They were
wholesome.
showing.
They
They
pushed
were
that
more
narrative.
wholesome than we are today, but they were.
It was a
It's just.
different kind of whole. It was a different kind of wholesome. Like
Mm,
it was like, you couldn't sleep in the same bed with someone else. You couldn't, they barely showed people pregnant. They didn't show toilets flushing. They didn't show all these basic things. But yeah, I
yeah,
mean, they did it in
but a
such a
gun to
way
the head's
where,
fine.
yeah, exactly. you wanna be hit in the head with an iron or a brick? How about it? Yeah, totally. Jump out of a 1,000-story building off of a 1,000-story cliff and fall to your death with a little sign that says "Yikes!" Oh yeah, definitely go for it. So fun
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, it really is. It's really crazy to think about. But so to kind of finish out the episode before we get into the ranking, what was your after watching this episode, rewatching on a critical aspect? What do you think of the episode?
Okay, so I know that we're gonna differ on this point, but
Mm,
I love the fact that this takes, like, it looks at least the way that it's shot. It's not just a standard 3-camera studio setup. You
yeah,
actually have a lot of really interesting shots. They used a lot of interesting lighting. It was outside the box in a lot of ways, and I really appreciate that part. Like, the
right,
director took his time to make sure that this was well done. He understood what kind of an episode it needed to be. That a standard medium shot wasn't going to be able to convey, like, this guy's fear about death. And I really appreciate that aspect of it. And, like, whether it was intentioned or not, all of the talk of dreams and all that stuff, I really, really, really enjoy this episode.
yeah. I'm gonna be straight honest with you. I still am not a huge fan of the episode. I don't like where the Doctor and Edward and all that stuff. I feel it gets very campy, and I think some of the dream stuff gets very campy. So I'm really not on board with that. I'm not. I'm definitely. This is not a top 20 episode for me. Maybe not
Oh,
even top
just hurt.
50. But the one thing I can say about this, and as the episodes get more and more and we start getting more and more comfortable, when an episode can have a discussion, a very metaphysical discussion, very deep
In depth.
discussion about, yeah, in-depth discussion. I go with weird words apparently, but
That's
in-depth
okay.
discussion is a much easier word. Um, that definitely helps improve the episode.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be fairly honest. When we can talk about and we can actually have, you know, all seriousness, when we talked about the 60 millimeter shrine, we talked about some very interesting stuff with that episode, but we didn't really find like the huge amount of deep stuff in that episode. And it's the same thing was like, where's everybody? But this episode has a lot of deep discussions and stuff like that. And even though it won't ever hit my top 50, and it may hit top 50 for this podcast, but just for me personally, I still got to give it credit for that. I still got to give Charles Beaumont and Rod Serling and Rod Serling enough credit where they were, even if it was not intentional, they allow for this much discussion because Walking Distance, Time Enough at Last, even one for the Angels and Escape Clause, they also allow for this kind of discussion. So with that said, I'll read down for number one. We have Walking Distance. It's definitely not as good as Walking Distance.
No.
Number 8 is 60 millimeter Shrine. I definitely think it's better than 60 millimeter Shrine. I'm gonna have to start sending you this list because this list is gonna get long.
I think so too, because because
yeah, I'm gonna send
I
this
remember
after.
Walking Distance was one. I think I know. I
Well,
think one for the Angels was like 3.
Yeah, let me do this. Like next week's episode or the next episode we record, I'll send it to you just to,
Okay.
I'll keep updating and keep sending
Refresher.
it to you. But for right now, Walking Distance is number 1. Time Enough at Last is number 2. 3 is One for the Angels.
Mhm.
Escape Clause number 4. The Lonely number 5. 6 is Mr. Denton on Doomsday. Number 7 is Where Is Everybody, and number 8, 16mm Shrine. If I were to put this anywhere, I would put this right below Escape Clause above The Lonely because I have such problems with The Lonely.
So that's number 4 or 5 for you.
Yeah, number 4 is Escape Clause, so I would put this
Okay.
at number 5 for the time being, or for this ranking. Do you feel it could be higher than Escape Clause? Because right now, I think you think it could be higher than Escape Clause. Really?
Part of me does. Like, I love what they did with the, and I'm a sucker for awesome like production design, especially with something like this. I don't know.
'Cause
I feel like it's
the top
better than
3
Escape Clause.
Okay, because the top 3 I don't think they're way better than this episode, to be honest. Well, let's kind of break
So
this
it
down.
goes. It's Walking Distance.
Time Enough
What's
at
number 2?
Last.
Time Enough at Last, and
One for the Angels.
Yeah, I think it goes right below One Below the Angels for me.
Well, let me ask you this on this kind of, do you think because of the discussion, because Escape Clause is more about the a-hole version of an individual, do you think that's the reason why? Or
I think that probably plays in quite a lot because we had quite an in-depth discussion on it, and it does raise a lot of questions. And I don't know, I will still say, and I know that the story wasn't quite as strong, but the production design on this, the way that they did it, it does stick with me. Like I don't normally take note of a lot of that stuff because it is standard 3 camera studio setup, and this one didn't do that. It did have some cool shots, which I know you can't judge an entire production by like 2 or 3 cool shots.
Yeah, and no. Well, no, go with me on this. I would disagree with you, but I started thinking as you were talking, and I'm like, I like Escape Clause, but outside of the devil, I so hate that main character so much, and I think he's so apprehensible or whatever. It's hard because I'm not gonna like. It's not one of those episodes where we're gonna totally agree on, but I think because of the discussion, I'll accept it at number 4 just for that reason because it really did. Well, no, this is not. This is just. Well, this is just because. What was I gonna say? This was because I really didn't go into this episode liking this, and like I said, it's not in my top 50, but this is not. This is a co-podcast, not a me podcast. So I can.
And we're only 9 episodes in, actually. So
yeah. And the fact that we had this much discussion about it, I'm just gonna go fuck it. Excuse my language. I'm gonna go fuck it and put number 4 as
you're gonna
Perchance
go
a
fuck
Dream.
the episode. I don't think that you should go fuck unless you're gonna go enjoy a carnival and spend some fun time with Maya. I don't know that I would fuck this episode outrightly. Neither of the 2 leads were that good looking, although that couch looked plenty soft and fun.
That's a different dream. So with that said,
gotta wait into the episode, huh?
I know, right? So with that said, I will concede. I will put Perchance to Dream at number 4. Like I said, my issues with this episode are outweighed by the discussion. Simple fact, simple reason. It had a lot to say. That's where I'm going to leave it at. It had way more to say than Escape Clause ever did. It had way more to say than The Lonely definitely ever did. It definitely had way more to say than the first few episodes we ever watched of this series, and it does lead hope to the next episode Charles Beaumont writes is of course Elegy, which I think is a fantastic episode, which won't lead into as much discussion as Perchance to Dream because that's a more cotton candy episode than this episode will ever be, but so with that said, I will concede and put it at number 4. So right now on our list, Walking Distance will stay number 1 for the time being. 16mm Shrine will stay at the bottom for the time being,
as it should.
as it should. And the next episode is an episode I kind of remember, is called Judgment Night, and of course is about a man who has amnesia, and he somehow is on a U-boat, not U-boat, on a boat that's being attacked by a U-boat, I think it is.
Yep.
Or something.
It's being tracked
something,
by a U-boat.
yeah, which if I remember the conclusion, I thought was really fascinating, but we'll see when we get to the episode. But it has a lot of people in it. Actually, nobody I recognize, but there's at least like 12 people in this.
Yeah,
big cast.
It's a large cast.
Exactly. So we'll leave it for the next episode, which will be actually our 10th episode, and that'll do it. That'll be our take on season 1, episode 9, which is Perchance a Dream. And as we conclude, as we always do, Trivial Theater, where can they find your stuff?
You can find me in the Trivial Theater, which has a lot of blinking lights and is all decked out for Halloween right now.
Exactly.
No.
And
you can find me on YouTube at Trivial Theater. I'm in the middle of spooky month, so stop by and say hi. I've got at least 2 more episodes coming out this month.
And you actually just did an episode with Morbid Heart Designs called Black Roses, which I've never heard of before. But
it's a great movie.
Some of the stuff that Morbid Heart Designs was doing, especially the guitar at the beginning, was kind of awesome. So, you did that in Little Shop of Horrors as well, which was awesome. So,
love that movie.
Yeah.
Definitely not like this, but definitely not like this episode.
No, definitely not. Though there's some discussion about plant eating people. So so look out for content as always. And with that said, you can find me at Movie Emporium, youtube.com/Movie Emporium, Twitter Movie Emporium, all that stuff. Getting ready to head into a lot of movies here within a couple of weeks, so look out for all that content. But that'll do it. That'll be our 9th episode, which is on Perchance a Dream. And with that said, we'll see you guys in the Twilight Zone. Peace out, everyone.
Take care. I don't want to have a recording in progress. Well,
we'll have recording in Congress.
To that too. Also